So every trip I took was a little bit different. The first trip I went to was in, I believe, September of 2014, and that was to the Jordan Azatari camp, which is, at the time was still, I think, one of the largest refugee camps in the world, if not the second largest refugee camp in the world. At its creation, it was about 250,000 people that were living there. At the time I went, I think it was a little over 100,000, and I think now it's down even further than that. So I departed from here soon after I finished my training. I had arranged that I was just going to be traveling by myself, but through the SAMS organization, they had facilitated all the contacts and given me all the information I needed. I went there, and you land in Amman, Jordan, and then you take about an hour car ride into the middle of the desert, where you have this UN-based refugee camp that is just, it's like a city of tents, basically, of people that left everything in the world, left all their houses, their families, all their belongings to stay in this desert. And they had been at that, a lot of people have been at that desert for several years and living day in and day out. I went kind of towards the end of the summer where it was extremely hot, but I had the luxury of going back to my air-conditioned hotel or air-conditioned house, and they stayed there. So we would go, I would go with the driver. We get there about 10 o'clock, we work till about 5 o'clock. We would see they would give me a clinic. They would tell everybody that doctors from America is here to see you, and we'd see about 60 patients a day. And that's just a normal day for them. They have a whole city of people who have not had the opportunity to bring their medications, not an opportunity to do anything, and no one's really caring for them except for some wonderful volunteers. They have a clinic that's set up there that, again, SAMS is primarily the funding group there, where the collaboration of some very generous Jordanian pharmacists and some Syrian refugee physicians work together to provide care for these people, and they know all 100,000 people in the camp basically, and they take care of them and they help them and they do anything they can for them. It's primarily like an urgent care clinic where we have acute problems, so you see a lot of things like gastrointestinal diseases, diarrhea, constipation, nausea, vomiting, heartburn. You see a lot of respiratory illnesses, asthma exacerbations, bronchitis, pneumonia, a lot of arthritis, a lot of strain from the conditions. There's a lot of what we call like fecal oral contamination. So there's not a sewage system there. It's just, like I said, in the middle of a desert with a bunch of tents popped up. So the sewage system is not established. So when heavy rains happen, basically the excrements are dug into the ground, and when it rains, those excrements are contaminated. The water that they get is rationed, and it's very chemical oriented in its nature. It's very difficult to drink with. Kids often get sick from it. There's basically just, if you can imagine, pitched up in a tent in the middle of a desert for years and years and years, living like that. The amazing thing about the people in Jordan, though, and I visited them, and then 6 months later I visited with a group of a mission trip with maybe 30-some physicians from all different specialties. We went back and did another trip then. But the amazing thing about the people in Jordan, and each camp is different. The Jordan camp was a group of people who are living there who do not complain, right? So these are refugees who don't tell you their issues. They say everything's okay, and they have a smile on their face, and they're very religious people, very optimistic people. They're thankful to be in those camps, despite the horrendous nature that we think that it is. They're thankful to be there, and you have a whole family of 8 people living in a tent. It's no bigger than 7 feet wide, maybe 3-4 feet length, and they're happy, they're okay, they're safe. They are optimistic for better days. When you dive in deeper, you ask them, why are you here? What makes you so happy to be here? And you hear about the stories of their houses being bombed, or Assad military storming their house in the middle of the night, and the food sanctions and the death threats, the family members that they've lost, they're thankful to be away from that, and they're hopeful for better days in the future. They're very strong people, they're very brave people, very appreciative people. You know, when they come and see somebody visiting them, they are nothing but smiles and things like that. And they're also some of the most generous people I've ever met in my life. They often, you'll see this all the time. And I think it was actually on the news one time. I think maybe it was like Angelina Jolie or something like that. One of these famous actresses saw a kid playing with marbles, and the kid didn't know who this actress was. She's a world famous actress. All the people are taking pictures. He doesn't know who she is, and he's playing with marbles, and he's got 3 marbles, and he goes and plays with her with the marbles, and he has fondness to a certain one, and he says it's his favorite, and he gives it to her. Right? So this is a lady with millions and millions of dollars. This is a kid with 3 marbles, and he's the one that's giving the donation to the actress. Right? So, and we saw that same thing there. So whenever we arrive, the people there are always inviting us to their tents, wanting us to eat with them, wanting us to drink with them, insisting that we stay with them for the night, and the generosity amongst them it's just out of this world. People with so little that are so generous is why you aren't drawn back to them, because they're in a difficult situation and they never asked or did anything to deserve this. I mean, they're people who were just living, and they had safety and they had security, and that was all taken away from them. They all had jobs, they were educated people, no different than any of us here, that all of a sudden had that stripped from them because of greed and corruption and evil politics. So that was pretty much my Jordan experience. They are making the best of that situation. They've tried to settle it. They live in dire conditions, but given the strong-willedness of the people there, I think they make the best of it. I then had a trip northern Iraq, the Kurdistan area, and that's a different situation entirely. That was about a year ago almost, a little less than a year ago. And that situation, the beauty of, the good thing about the Zaatari camp is everyone's kind of located in the same place, but with the northern Iraq, you have a lot more diversity. You have the Iraqis who have fled, you have the Syrians that have fled, you have different ethnic groups that have fled from Iraq, you have different religious groups from Iraq that have fled, and same thing from Syria. And so you have a lot of small camps, and getting care to all these different small camps is very hard. And then also in Jordan, the movements of the refugees is very restricted, where in Iraq it's much more liberal. So you'll see a lot of homeless people in the streets of major cities, and you'll see kids in abandoned houses who have now called that their home without any electricity or any water or anything like that. You see a lot of people begging, you see a lot of things like that. Also with the camps, if you go to the camp, the problem is that the resources are stretched very, very thin. There are some organizations like the Emirati Red Crescent, there were some NGOs from some Kurdish NGOs that were helping out the situation. They're doing the best they can. There's not a lot of surgeries, there's not a lot of dental care. It's a lot of just putting band-aids on things. And again, the same situation, it's tents in the middle of the desert. When it rains, it floods, the tents can collapse. When it's cold, it's people die of either freezing to death, or a common thing that happens is these tents are flammable actually. So you light a fire to stay warm, and the whole tent catches on fire, which I know they've been trying very hard to try to fix that situation for years now, to get non-flammable tents, which seems like common sense, but nothing about this situation is common sense. They have these, so that there where there's a little bit more organization, there's a little bit more freedom for the refugees, but it was still very segregated and very difficult, and the number of refugees was only growing in nature. It's almost impossible for them to survive outside the refugee camps because it's so expensive. So we're seeing that the refugee camps are only expanding in size, and they're getting larger and larger. there's people who fled their different situations, took their life savings, and thought they could move to northern Iraq or Kurdistan and live off their money. But the supply-demand discrepancy has caused prices to skyrocket, and people quickly blow through all their money, and a lot of people are retreating now to the refugee camps, where again you have ration food, ration water, ration supplies. There's no work for people, and I think that sense of desperation is really what's difficult. You have grown men who want to work, and you have families who don't have enough resources, kids who don't have much outlook on life. You ask them what they want to be for when they grow up, and they don't have an answer. That's a weird question to them. They can't figure out tomorrow, let alone anything else. There's no excitement about school or careers or anything like that. And then the last trip I was at was just a few months back. I was in Greece, and Greece is by far the worst situation I've seen. It's the same group of people, but multiplied. So there was so much confusion with what was going on with the refugee situation, with whether Europe was going to open up their borders or not. Initially they did, and then they kind of retracted. A lot of people got caught in the middle. So there's a great number of refugees that are trapped in Greece. These are people from all over the world. We're talking about, they were at one point refugees from Morocco. There are refugees from Syria, Iraq, Libya. There are refugees from Pakistan and Afghanistan. And they all rushed to Europe, not out of, and this is a and they all tell the same story. Nobody went to Europe for money, right? Europe sometimes labels the refugees as either economic or war-torn refugees, and they label the Pakistani and the Afghani refugees as non-war-torn. These are economic refugees, they call them, which is absurd because the United States is bombing both those countries. There is military action in both those countries. And so the notion that they aren't fleeing war is absurd. So you have these people who have all fled there to Greece for safety, and that's all they ask for. They ask for safety for their family. And you can ask whether they are a Yazidi, whether they're a Christian, whether they're a Muslim, whether Sunni or Shia, whether they're from Pakistan or whether they're from Syria. You ask them what happened, and they all tell the same story. They tell the exact same story. Every single person tells the same story. We were sitting in our house, and the bombs started to drop. And I lost my brother, I lost my mother, I lost my father, I lost my sister, I lost my son, I lost whoever it was that they lost. They lost somebody. And that threat, not to them directly, but that threat to their family is what made them leave. They want a better life for their family. They want to be able to raise their kids in a safe environment. That's all they want. So they all left their countries, and the ones from Pakistan and the one in Afghanistan left by walking. Right? So they walked for 1 month time period. Some people took longer, but on average we hear about 1 month it took them to walk from Afghanistan, Pakistan, all the way to Greece. And you have people, obviously, you hear about all these boat capsizings from northern Africa and from Syria. These are people that are willing to risk their lives because they know that they're in these horrible situations, that either they die there or they can maybe have this hope of future. And they hear about all these remote stories of, oh, my cousin went to Germany and they had a good life or something like that, or my cousin went to Sweden and they gave her a job, or whatever it is, or somebody had some good story that they're just dying to, that slight chance of hope that they're going after. So then when they got to Greece, the Macedonia closed its borders. The rest of the Europeans said no more refugees, and they just kind of got trapped. And Greece got trapped, and the refugees got trapped. And so you have this massive influx. I think they say about 65,000 refugees stuck in Greece. And when they were stuck in Greece, they were literally just stuck there. There was just police at the border of Macedonia, and you couldn't go any further. And if you tried to cross the border, they would beat you. So people just started pitching tents, and we're not talking about the United Nations tents that we see in Jordan and in Iraq and most of the world when we see these UN tents. We're talking they look like the cheap Walmart tents that you buy for like $20. Right? They're really, really small. They're maybe like 3 foot by 4 foot. and whole families staying in them. And the Greece government kind of designated a few areas where they would allow people to pitch tents, and usually they're gas stations, right? So we're talking about people living in the outer environment of a gas station. And Greece is cold, and so in the winters they had to use anything they can to light fires, otherwise they would have to deal with the bitter cold, and it was very difficult. So the things that we saw in Greece were a lot of respiratory infections, a lot of really bad bronchitis, a lot of asthma. People just can't breathe because the things they use to burn, they use anything they can, like nylon bags, like those like grocery bags that we see. People use their clothes, anything they can get, just to stay warm, just to stay alive, just to cook on. Right? There's nothing to cook. It's like you're camping in the woods permanently, but you're dealing with all the horrible terrains of rain and snow, and then when the summer comes, it's the heat. That's the opposite problem. There's no support system. There's no infrastructure. It's just pure chaos. There's no safety. It's nothing. You're completely alone out there, and you see that the people notice the difference. Right? So the people in Jordan, the people in Iraq, at least have some sense of hope, future, and people in Greece, refugees in Greece, have absolute despair, and they regret being in Greece. Nobody wanted to go to Greece. Right? Greece is having its own economic problems. They are struggling themselves. There's no opportunity. There's no future in Greece. They have no sense of safety or security in Greece. They're being told every day that they're going to be deported here, they're going to be exported there, they're going to be sent back to Syria, they're going to be sent to Turkey. They don't know how they're going to get there, they don't know anything. There's no sense of hope, there's no sense of future, there's no sense of jobs, the rations are extremely poor. I mean, the amount of food that people would get was never enough. They didn't have milk for babies. I mean, there was very, very few rationed amounts of formula for women. The only people that could get formula was an emergent situation, and everyone else was told to breastfeed. And sometimes there wouldn't be enough, mothers would have difficulty producing enough milk for their babies. So that was the tough situation that they were going through. It was no sense of security, no sense of safety. You were constantly being harassed by the border patrol. There was these tear gas riots. There were the security threats that were always going on. You hear about people trying to cross the border and being beat up. You hear about miscommunications that leads to eruptions of violence. It's a very difficult situation in Greece. People don't have hope. People kept saying, let me just go back to X country, whether it was Syria or Iraq. Let me just die where my brother died. Let me just die where my mother died. Let me let me get a mercy kill with a bomb blowing up my house, and let me just die like everybody else died. This is not how we want to live. We didn't come here for money. We didn't come here for anything. We came here for a future for our kids, and there's no future for our kids here. In fact, they're just killing us slowly here. So that was the message we saw there, and that was a horrendous thing. That was very, very difficult. There was no sort of sense of organization within the NGOs there. Everyone pitches up a tent, tries to do the best they can, but there's no coordination, there's no government there. The UN is way behind, the EU is way behind. So you do the best you can. I will say the Greek people are wonderful people. They want to help. The vast majority of them want to help. But they're also struggling themselves. We've met some very generous Greek surgeons who helped us out tremendously. They opened up their doors to some refugees that were in some dire need, and were able to work with us and say, we're all refugees from another country. We're all the same people. And the people that I work with in different trips, they're from all over the world, and they're from all different races and all different religions, and they all say the same thing. We're all brothers and sisters in this world. We all have to take care of each other. The people who volunteer and the people who are victims are the same people. They all have the same hearts. They all have the same intentions. They all have the same beliefs. They all care for each other the same. And I think that most of the world does. I think it's the politics and it's the corruption that really is the driving force for all this evilness. Because if you meet these refugees, when people say these things about refugees being terrorists undercover, terrorists wouldn't do that. They wouldn't live these lives of living in the middle of a desert, or risk putting their children on boats knowing very well that there's a high probability these boats could capsize, just for safety. Right? They're not looking for any instability, they're looking for stability. If you meet these refugees, if you talk to these refugees, their stories are not stories of hate. They never, they're not preaching hate, they're preaching safety, peace, and serenity. And anybody who meets them can tell you that. That's the crazy thing.